At first, the world was huge, too big for anyone who dared to call it by name. Small human groups lived on the edge of the plains, between the tall grass and the silence of the rocks. The night came cold, with a wind passing through the bones and shaking the fires. On the day, it smelled wet soil, burnt wood, of skin worked with patience. No one knew where his world really ended. There were footprints, hunting remains and paths followed only by those who were hungry. Children soon learned that security was fragile, just a change in the sky. As long as the praise were gone, as long as the water disappeared in the dry mud. Then he left. Always with fire, always with fear, always with the idea that beyond the horizon, there could be something better. But even something worse, and it was from that uncertainty that all began. It was not the ideas that saved man. They were feet, hands, teeth, breath. Every generation learned to recognize the weight of the cold on the fingers, the pulled leather, the chipped stone, the smoke burning the eyes. In the temporary villages where sheltered blades and baskets sewed the skin divided the food. The mothers looked at the sky with the same look they controlled the children. The hunters came back with a short breath, mud, filthy, folded shoulders. Every gesture was a response to an environment that did not forgive. The world wasn't a friend. It was proof, and whoever remained still, often lost. Thus man began to learn the pace of animal migration. The rainy weather, the time of drought, the time it was necessary to follow the river, and the time it was necessary to abandon it. Survival had no glory. He only needed. Then came the water, a brilliant line on the horizon, and beyond that line a new risk. The coast smelled of salt and rotten algae. The wind had a different sound. Opener. Harder. The waves broke on the stones with an ancient voice, and the human group stopped to look at them as they look at an unknown beast. Some were afraid, others saw fish, shells, new roads, because the sea, even when dreadful, can become a way. There was no navigation in the sense we know. There were rafts, inflated skins, attempts, errors, bodies thrown in the distance. Every crossing was a bet with the dark. But the human body soon learned that water divided, and together united. The coasts became corridors, and along those corridors slowly man began to expand. The world was changing shape in its footsteps. Before the cards there were memories. Before the routes there were stories. An old man indicated a valley and said where to find water when the season turned out. A woman remembered the passage of animals and the right time to follow them. A boy learned not to trust too quiet places. Each wound became teaching. Every absence became a distance to avoid. Migration was not a casual escape. They were knowledge accumulated in the body. Those who left carried good stones, hunting techniques, ways to light fire even in the rain. It mainly brought memory. To cross the world, there was no need for force. Needed to know what to save and what to leave behind. In those invisible choices, the true power of humanity was hidden, because each surviving group became more suitable than the previous one, and the planet began slowly to recognize its presence. The great journey did not begin with a flag, it started with need. Human groups followed rivers, steppes, forest margins, regions where the cold bit and the wind never stopped. The ground changed under the feet. The steppes became slower in the mud areas, faster in the open plains. The nights were very long. The sky seemed closer. In some areas, man encountered new species. In others, he had to compete for the same prey with other humans, different but similar enough to seem a threat. Each meeting could be exchanged, or clash, and the world, step by step, became more populated with human presences. It wasn't just a local survival story anymore. It was a presence that progressed. No noise, but no stop. When the weather got harder, not everyone resisted. The frost came into the curtains, slipped into the seams, cured the skin. The breath became cloud. The hands moved quickly, because stopping too much meant suffering. To live in those places, you had to change everything. Closed clothes. Better built fires. Fires guarded night and day. The hunt followed new rules. The animals moved, and the man with them, who couldn't fit, was behind. Those who knew how to observe, however, found the way. Cold didn't just destroy lives, affinated the ingenuity. Feed selection, and it forced humanity to become more elastic, more resistant, more inventive. It was a silent conquest, but decisive. At some point, the passage seemed possible. Low seas, nearby coasts, visible land from one landing to another. Man did not know the name of those places, but he understood when a distance could be exceeded. Hands built, repaired, bonded. Families looked at the water with a mixture of fear and expectation. Silence was often stronger than words, because every new crossing called for courage to all. A single decision was not enough. Serve the consent of those who were hungry. Who'd bring the kids? Who knew on the other side could not return? Yet you went, because staying at certain times was more dangerous than leaving. So the world continued to open. And the next step was the most surprising of all. When men reached Australia, they entered a world separated from immense times. The light was different. Trees projected strange shadows. The air seemed dry, sharp, loaded with new smells. There were never seen birds. There were huge animals in real estate that seemed to come out of a dream. The ground cracked under his feet. Each step was a meeting with the unknown. People stopped to observe the water, the plants, the smoke that rose straight into the hot sky. There was nothing familiar. And just for this, all had to be learned again. The hunt changed. The tracks changed. Even the way to listen to the forests changed. Australia was not only a new land, it was a new test for human imagination. And the price of adaptation would have been very high. In Australia, man did not impose his rhythm. He had to listen. The fire was brought carefully, protected by the wind, guarded as a heart. The seasons did not speak as elsewhere. The rain could delay. The land could burn. Survival depended on the poor knowledge of the places, where to find water, where to take refuge, where to follow the animals, and where to let them pass. Communities developed tools, techniques, paths. Each generation added something. Every mistake taught something more. The continent was not empty. It was full of relationships between landscapes, animals, and human beings who were learning to be together. And in that continuous adaptation, man became less and less host, more and more part of the place. Then came the great vacuum. In many places, the giant animals disappeared. Some died for the climate, other perhaps for human pressure, direct or indirect. Scholars still discuss the exact times and causes, but the landscape changed anyway. And he quickly changed over centuries. Where huge bodies moved first, traces, bones, empty spaces remained. The night seemed wider. The sounds of the less deep wood. Man had to change again. Less prey big. More attention. More knowledge of the little. More ability to read the fragile balance between use and destruction. That lesson was not written. It was lived and remained in the body of successive generations. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the world did not stop. Humanity continued to spread, to change, to occupy new spaces. Some groups moved towards Nordic regions and frosts. Others followed. Terrestrial corridors today disappeared. Between Asia and those distant lands, the sea fell in extreme cold times. Where today there is water, then there could be vast expanses emerged. Nobody then saw a frontier. There were only opportunities and dangers. Yet someone dared to cross. Not once, but enough to open the way to a whole human continent. It would have been a long, hard, almost incredible journey. And when it happened, the world never came back. To understand that conquest, you have to approach the frost. And people who didn't stop walking. The Beringia was not a stone bridge. It was a wide, cold, exposed land. The wind ran low on the hard grass. The snow was laying at pizzas. The hands covered with furs and animal fat to resist frost. The eyes looked for signs in the distance. Bisanti mamut, caribou. Everything was chased. Everything was waiting. People were advancing in small groups, keeping fire as a living relic. Every day was a resistance test. Every night a negotiation with the cold. But that passage existed, and it was great enough to bring humanity to a world that no one had yet seen. Behind them remained Asia. In front, the largest of mysteries. The Americas were not found, as an empty house is located. They were slowly reached, perhaps along coast, perhaps through inner corridors open from the withdrawal of the ice. Scholars still discuss exact details, but one thing is certain: once they entered, the men stood in front of a scale of almost endless landscapes. Wet forests, plains immense, mountains, deserts, very long stamps, climbs changing with an almost cruel speed. Those who arrived had to learn everything, again. It wasn't enough to be human. It was necessary to become human in that precise place. And to do so, they needed open eyes, courage, and an extraordinary ability to adapt. In the plains, the wind was almost constant. He brought dust, seeds, smell of dried grass. Herds moved like living waves. Men followed them with patience, reading the ground and the changes of heaven. Stone spikes became sharper. The groups learned to cooperate better. A hunt could feed a lot. A mistake could leave everyone without anything. The children grew up among dust and stories, learning that the world was bigger than every single tent. American plains were open, but not easy, exposed to frost, thirst, hunger, yet full of possibilities. Every success brought new steps. Each step opened a new horizon. Humanity was not just spreading. He was becoming able to live almost every form of land. But there were no plains. American forests asked for more eyes. The rivers asked for more hands. Mountains, other lungs. Life broke into many forms. In a place he was fishing with simple nets. Others gathered unknown roots and fruits. In another, small, fast animals were followed, difficult to catch. The settlements adapted to the landscape like water to the container. People learned to build different shelters, to read local seasons, to respect the time of wild crops. Here, humanity was not one. It was many humanity, united by a common origin but transformed by the way. Every environment left a mark, and every sign became identity. The world was finally full of its traces. Adaptation was not a heroic gesture. It was a sum of small corrections. A slightly more suitable dress, a little dry shelter, a path learned by heart, a new food tried with caution, a mistake avoided the next time. The communities that survived better were not necessarily the strongest. They were often the most attentive, those who can listen to the place instead of fighting it. Humanity never stopped changing. He changed when he was getting married, when he was hunting, when he went through difficult seasons, when he decided to stop. And in that continuous change, there was its true strength. Not brutal conquest, but patience, the ability to stay alive long enough to learn. At this point, the story was no longer that of a few isolated groups. It was a planetary transformation. From Eurasia to the distant islands, from Australia to the Americas, the human being had reached almost every great region. Not everywhere at the same time, not by the same means, not without loss. But the result was clear. The world had stopped being a hostile and unknown extension. It had become a network of human places. Each territory still carried its hardness, but man had learned to enter, resist, transform himself. This was not the conquest of a kingdom. It was the conquest of the possibility. And the possibility forever changed the fate of the species. The whole planet now also spoke with his voice. But every conquest left behind an invisible part. Species disappeared, broken horsemen, lands consumed with slowness, lost knowledge, and then found in different forms. Human adaptation was powerful, but he wasn't innocent. Where he came, the landscape changed. Where man remained long, the surrounding world had to respond to his presence. Sometimes this response was fertile. Sometimes it was irreparable. And maybe this is where history becomes more human. Because surviving does not only mean winning, it also means bringing the weight of what has become. Humanity conquered the world, but the world at the same time was changing humanity. Today that story lives in the remains, in the stones, in the sediments, in the genes, lives in the places crossed and then forgotten. It lives in the instruments consumed, in the blackened out, in the broken bones to extract the marrow. Researchers dig with thin brushes. They work in silence, under the sun or in the rain. Every fragment tells a passage. Each layer of land holds a threshold. And when the picture reappears, something surprising appears. We are not the result of a single country. We are the result of a long ability to leave, stop, change, start again. Australia, the Americas, the deserts, the forests, the ice. All this is not just geography. It is human memory imprinted on the planet, and it is still there under our steps. In this documentary, the following works and research institutions have been used as main historical sources. Chris Stringer, Lone Survivors, How We Came to Be the Only Humans on Earth. Rebecca Ragg Sykes, Kindred, Neanderthal, Life, Love, Death, and Art. Neanderthal Man, In Search of Lost Genomes. Robin Dunbar, Human Evolution. Peter Bellwood, First Migrants, Ancient Migration and Global Perspective. Alan Cooper, Michael D. Petraglia, Peter Hiscock, and other scholars published on Nature and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. Australian Museum Research Institute. Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. National Museum of the American Indian,